From January the 12th, 2021, Nadim Zahawi. We have no plans to introduce vaccine passports. We have vaccinated as of yesterday 2,431,648 first dose and 412,167,000 second dose. No one has been given or will be required to have a vaccination, blah 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 blah. Retweet from Claire Fox. Good to hear again. Can we hold you to this? Nadim Zahawi. Yes, you can, Claire. Oh, how times have changed. And we'll get to that soon. I wanted to read this first, as it sets a standard, a baseline for what we've had to deal with for the last 11 years. Late last week, and 2 vaccines later, Sajid Javid, the new health secretary who took over from Mr. Hands-on Hancock, tested positive for the COOF, which meant instant isolation for him and others that he came into contact with. The 2 more notable were Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Boris Johnson, the guy that answers to Carrie Symonds, who actually runs the country. However, Boris Johnson declined, along with Rishi Sunak, to go into isolation. The reason why is because they were a part of a pilot scheme, and thus began a mass memeage. The more notable of which was this that was shared to my Discord server. Others would include a whole slew of memes shared via the Daily Mail of all sites. The whole rules only apply to you. One rule for me, but not for thee. Don't worry though, I mentioned the Conservative government have a bit of a track record for the last 11 years, and it wasn't long until, much like with many other policies they've introduced or things they've said, they U-turned, and so Boris and Rishi are now in isolation. At some point we as a society are going to get to a point where isolation is akin to that of solitary confinement, where you rock up to an isolation centre and you get locked away for 14 days or however many days you're locked up for. Like a short prison sentence, the crime catching something that you couldn't stop your body from catching, which is obviously 100% your fault and a crime. We'll get to more of that later. It turns out some of these conspiracy theorists were actually right, or are being proven to be right. An article was released not long after by The Independent, claiming that international experts convened at an emergency summit ahead of England's unlocking, which was on July 19th, we'll get to that soon I promise, where they believe that Boris Johnson is pursuing a COVID policy of mass infection that poses a danger to the world. Their belief is because the infection rate is as high as it is at the moment, 1 in 95 adults no less, the belief is that this could then cause problems if the virus mutates. And because the number's so high, it should in theory spread faster, especially if the country is not 100% shut down, which is very much the position of the opposition, which is irritating because it seems neither of the 2 main parties have a solution to this problem and are doing exactly what the voters expect them to do: blame each other for whatever it is they think is wrong, while not actually addressing the problem itself. I know, imagine my shock. Shortly after the release of that article, that was actually when Rishi Sunak and the Prime Minister went into isolation, but not in those little cubes I mentioned earlier, akin to that of a prison cell at some kind of prison. No, they go to their very rather plush VIP-styled residences. Turns out, people were triggered just enough to elicit a response that forced his hand. But he's going to be comfortable while he's there. During this time, there have been many protests, and much of it's been trending. No vaccination, anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine passports. Those terms have been trending for a while. Turns out there's some validity to it. But before we get to that, I want to quickly note an article I saw on the BBC. Armband calls for those with weak immune systems. And I thought this was a joke. Turns out, no it's not. Neil Collingwood from Leek, Staffordshire, said the ending of England's lockdown rules was not good news for people less able to fight off COVID-19. And so he has a prototype on his arm. Looks like it was made by a toddler. The idea of having these bands, akin to that of a passport as well, a means of separating people based on severity of or likelihood of catching something, is a bad idea. But we'll get to that in a moment. Don't worry. On the 19th of July, Boris Johnson confirmed the requirement for something that I earlier stated right at the start the government was not going to do but have naturally U-turned on it. And that was, by September, to gain access to domestic social venues, you would require a vaccine passport, which he ironically announced on Freedom Day. Here's a clip of that.
By the end of September, when all over 18s will have had their chance to be double jabbed, we're planning to make full vaccination the condition of entry to nightclubs and other venues where large crowds gather. Proof of a negative test will no longer be enough.
When it comes to how people have received this, it has actually been 50-50. Some believing you need to be double vaccinated, some believing no vaccines, some believing that this will lead to a two-tier system, where people who have not been vaccinated will be denied the right to live their life, having their freedoms restricted even further. Others believing this is a form of social control so the government can continue to control you. And there is some validity to that at this point. They have U-turned on everything in favour of, under the guise of, your health, taking away your rights. And again, under the guise of your health, pushed for policy that would allow them to control you even more. This doesn't even feel conspiracy theory anymore. I had the word Orwellian stuck in my head for a long time. I can't imagine why. It has been queried whether or not this would get through Parliament and then the Lords. For the sake of it, Boris has a vast majority. It will go through both, because nobody in Parliament is against the idea of controlling people, especially when a gift horse is looking them in the mouth. One tweet that stood out to me. This government is an absolute shambles. The constant U-turns on decisions, the constant lies. People say, well, I didn't vote for them. Well, Labour is just as bad. It was Tony Blair who first wanted this whole digital ID thing. Our human rights is taking a battering here. Any vaccine should not be compulsory. When I went to Thailand, I was advised to get typhoid and hepatitis, not forced. Because the hashtag no mandatory vaccine was trending, that's how I noticed it. A band called Shed7, who've been around a long time, put out a poll giving 3 options for what people should do when they go see them in November, December. Here are the results so far. It is a tad concerning, and I'm sure it's going to bug a lot of people who want to go see live bands, but don't want to be forced to take something they don't want. And that's a big problem. You can make the arguments against the whole, yes, but for the greater good, or blah blah, you're being selfish. No, people have a right to choose whether they want something in their body or not, and to find a way to ensure they take it by taking away what they love, or taking away activities they enjoy, does the very thing Tony Blair said that it would do, but you, much like Tony Blair, don't believe it to be discriminatory, which by definition it is. There is no goalpost you can shift where it is anything but that. And quite frankly, this is one of the most embarrassing and damning statements of this current Conservative government. You turning left and right and having all the consistency and integrity of a wet paper bag. It's hardly surprising that the protesters outside Downing Street and protesting through London are getting more steam.
Yes, at the 21st of June. Yes, you did. But I guess it was too soon to go out raving with my crew. But at least my man's immune.
I heard him say on LBC, baby, this time we'll be free. Should have never trusted him. Them has never had a dream. Where's your papa?